The auditorium was packed. Cameras lined the back walls, reporters filled every seat, and the stage lights burned down on the two women standing at opposite podiums. This wasn't just another debate, it was the event everyone was waiting for. Kamala Harris, the vice president known for her sharp tongue, faced off against Jasmine Crockett, the rising congressional firebrand who had quickly gained a reputation for keeping her cool under fire. The tension was electric. Harris gripped her podium tightly, her expression already sharp as she waited for her chance to speak. Crockett, on the other hand, stood calm, her hands folded neatly, a faint smile on her lips as if she had already anticipated every move Harris might make. The moderator cleared his throat, announcing the next question. Before he could even finish, Harris cut him off, her voice rising like a storm. "Jasmine, you're reckless. Your so-called policies are nothing more than dangerous experiments. You think you can come in here with your theatrics and disrupt real leadership? You don't have the experience, you don't have the discipline, and frankly, you don't belong on this stage with me." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some people cheered Harris's outburst, while others looked shocked at the direct attack. Crockett didn't flinch. She simply blinked slowly, her expression unbothered, and then leaned slightly toward the microphone. Her voice was calm, steady, and deliberate, so different from the eruption that had just shaken the room. "Are you finished?" she asked softly. The audience hushed instantly. "Because if you are finished," Crockett continued, her voice measured and clear, "I'd like to respond. Not with shouting. Not with insults. But with facts. Something the American people deserve." The audience broke into scattered applause, which grew louder as Crockett straightened her notes. She didn't rush. She didn't raise her voice. She let the crowd settle before she spoke again. "You accuse me of lacking discipline, Madam Vice President. Yet what is more disciplined, losing your temper on stage, or standing firm in the face of it? What is real leadership, shouting at your opponents, or speaking to the people with honesty and clarity?" The applause thundered now, echoing off the walls of the auditorium. Harris's face tightened. She gripped the edges of her podium even harder, but Crockett was just warming up. Experience is important, yes. But experience without wisdom is just repetition of the same mistakes. And I refuse to repeat them. The people didn't send me here to blend in, they sent me here to demand change. Calmly. Fearlessly. And without apology. By the time she finished, the audience was on its feet. The energy had shifted entirely. Crockett hadn't just answered, she had turned Harris's eruption into a spotlight on her own composure. Harris's jaw clenched. For the first time that night, it wasn't Crockett under pressure. It was her. The moderator, caught in the middle of the energy shift, tried to regain control. "Thank you, Representative Crockett. Vice President Harris, would you like to respond?" But Harris didn't wait for the formality. She leaned toward her mic, her voice sharp and rising again. "This is exactly the kind of rehearsed performance I warned you about." She hides behind calm words, but her record is thin. She's not ready to lead, not ready to make tough decisions, not ready to handle the real weight of responsibility. Some in the crowd clapped, but the cheers were faint compared to the standing ovation Crockett had just received. Harris's voice cracked slightly as she pushed harder, her frustration bleeding through. Crockett turned her head slowly, looking at Harris with a composed smile. She didn't interrupt. She didn't roll her eyes. She simply waited until Harris's words trailed off, until the room quieted again. Then, Crockett leaned forward. "Madam Vice President," she began gently, "you mistake composure for performance. But let's not confuse the two. The American people are tired of theatrics, they're watching right now, and they see who is speaking with control and who is losing it." The audience erupted again, louder than before. Some even laughed nervously at the blunt truth in her words. Cameras zoomed in, capturing every flicker of emotion across Harris's face. Crockett's tone never wavered. If experience means shouting down every voice that dares to challenge you, then maybe it's not experience that's the problem. Maybe it's leadership that's gone out of touch. A roar of approval swept through the hall. Harris froze for a moment, realizing the very stage she thought she dominated was slipping out of her hands. The moderator tried to intervene again, but the room was no longer his to control. The crowd's energy had shifted entirely toward Crockett. Reporters were scribbling frantically, and the camera flashes made the stage glow like lightning. Harris's frustration boiled over. She slammed her hand on the podium. You think clever words make you ready for power? This isn't a classroom debate, Jasmine. This is the real world. And in the real world, calm smiles don't get things done. Hard decisions do. The audience gasped at the open display of anger. Some cheered her passion, but others shook their heads, murmuring at the loss of composure. Crockett tilted her head slightly, her expression unchanged. Then she leaned into the mic, her voice steady and cutting through the tension like glass. You're right about one thing, Madam Vice President. Hard decisions do need to be made. But the hardest decision a leader can make is to choose principle over ego, truth over theatrics, and people over power. The hall erupted. Thunderous applause, whistles, and shouts of support echoed as Crockett paused, letting the words sink in. She continued, her voice unwavering. If leadership means shouting down others, then perhaps it's time for new leadership. Because the people don't want to be silenced anymore. They want to be heard. And that's why I'm here. The applause turned into a standing ovation. Even those who came in undecided were on their feet, swept away by the force of Crockett's calm defiance. Harris stood frozen, her jaw set tight, her hand still pressed to the podium. For the first time, she seemed small on that stage. The roar of the crowd rolled on like a wave, forcing the moderator to raise his voice just to be heard. Ladies and gentlemen, please, let's keep the debate in order. But it was no use. The audience had chosen its moment, and Jasmine Crockett had become the center of it. Harris, red-faced, tried to reclaim ground. This is nothing but empty rhetoric, she shouted, her voice trembling. You have no plan, Jasmine. Just words. Words don't keep this country safe. Words don't solve crises. Words don't lead. Crockett didn't move. She waited until Harris's voice cracked into silence. Then, with measured calm, she spoke. Madam Vice President, you're right again, words alone don't lead. But words backed by action. Words backed by truth. That's what inspires a nation. And right now, the people aren't looking for someone who can yell the loudest. They're looking for someone who can think the clearest. The applause was instant, deafening. People in the back rows stood, clapping above their heads. Journalists whispered to each other that Harris had walked straight into a trap. Crockett glanced at the crowd, then back at Harris. Her tone softened, but it was sharper than ever. You accuse me of not being ready. But the truth is, leadership isn't measured by how many years you've sat in office. It's measured by how you carry yourself when the lights are brightest. And tonight, the people can see the difference. The entire hall was shaking with cheers now. Harris's face tightened even more. She looked less like the seasoned veteran in control and more like someone realizing the spotlight was slipping from her grasp. By now, the cameras were glued to Crockett. Every major network had their angles fixed on her, capturing the moment in crystal clarity. Social media feeds lit up as clips began circulating within minutes, hashtags with her name were already trending. Harris leaned forward again, her voice lower this time but edged with bitterness. You think this little performance will last? The real world isn't a cheering crowd. The real world doesn't clap for you when you make mistakes. And believe me, Jasmine, you will make mistakes. A hush fell over the audience. It was meant to be a warning, but it came out sounding more like a threat. Crockett didn't flinch. She placed her hand gently on the podium, took a slow breath, and looked Harris directly in the eye. You're right, I will make mistakes. Every leader does. But the difference is, I'll admit them, learn from them, and grow stronger. Because leadership isn't about pretending to be perfect. It's about having the humility to serve. The audience erupted again, louder than ever before. People weren't just clapping now, they were chanting her name. Crockett. 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 The sound rattled the rafters, drowning out anything Harris could have tried to say next. Crockett raised her hand slightly, signaling for quiet, and the chant softened. Her next words were delivered with calm precision. And maybe that's what this country needs most right now. Not someone who erupts when challenged. Not someone who silences voices. But someone who listens, responds, and stands steady, no matter how loud the storm. The room was silent for half a second, and then exploded into the kind of ovation usually reserved for victory speeches. Harris lowered her gaze, gripping her podium so tightly her knuckles turned white. For the first time in her career, she had no comeback. The moderator, sensing history unfolding, didn't even bother cutting in this time. He simply leaned back, letting the crowd roar and the cameras roll. Every network knew this clip would be replayed endlessly before the night was over. Harris tried to compose herself. She straightened her jacket, forced a smile, and leaned into the microphone with a tone meant to sound calm, but it came across strained. Theatrics may win the applause tonight, but governing is far different. Jasmine, you won't last a week in the real trenches of leadership. The words fell flat. No applause. No gasps. Just silence, broken only by the sound of a few people coughing in the audience. Crockett seized the moment. She turned her head slowly toward Harris and replied in a voice soft enough that the audience leaned in to hear. Madam Vice President, if leadership means surviving in trenches, then maybe that's the problem. Because trenches are where soldiers fight endless battles with no way out. The American people don't want trenches. They want bridges. The hall exploded in cheers again, the audience clapping and stamping their feet. Crockett's words echoed far beyond the stage, straight into the hearts of everyone watching at home. She continued, her voice still calm but cutting with precision. You talk about how long I'll last. But leadership isn't about surviving, it's about building a future. A future where people don't feel trapped in the same fights, the same shouting matches, the same empty promises. And tonight, I think the people are telling us they're ready for something new. The crowd rose once more, a standing ovation that stretched longer than any of Harris's applause. Cameras captured Harris's forced smile fading into a stiff, unreadable expression. She glanced at her notes but didn't speak. Jasmine Crockett had silenced the room, without ever raising her voice. The chants began again, echoing through the hall like thunder. Crockett. 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 The sound was deafening, filling the stage with an energy that even the moderator couldn't contain. It wasn't just support, it was a declaration. Harris's eyes darted across the audience. She tried to mask her unease with a tight smile, but it was clear the momentum had slipped completely away from her. She raised her hand, attempting to quiet the crowd, but the more she tried, the louder they became. Crockett, in contrast, lifted her hand gently. The audience responded immediately, falling quiet out of respect. The difference was striking. Harris demanded silence, but Crockett commanded it. Jasmine leaned into the microphone once more, her voice even softer than before, yet powerful enough to cut through the silence. This moment isn't about me. And it isn't about Madam Vice President either. It's about you, the people. You've watched leaders argue, you've seen tempers flare, and you've heard promises that never reached your doorstep. Tonight, I think it's clear, you're ready for leadership that doesn't erupt, but endures. The audience rose again, their applause thundering. Reporters scribbled notes, anchors whispered into cameras, and social media exploded with clips of the exchange. Hashtags with Crockett's name trended faster than anyone could track. Harris, visibly shaken, muttered something under her breath, but the microphones didn't catch it. She leaned back from her podium, realizing there was nothing left she could say that wouldn't deepen the damage. Crockett, still calm, folded her hands together and looked out at the crowd, not as a politician basking in victory, but as if she were already thinking about what came next. The debate wasn't over, but the narrative was sealed. Jasmine Crockett had not only silenced the room, she had stolen the night. The debate hall now felt less like a political event and more like a rally, one clearly tilting in Crockett's favor. Every camera lens zoomed in on her, every journalist typing furiously as if they knew they were witnessing a viral moment unfold in real time. Harris finally spoke again, her tone clipped, as though each word was being forced out. "Enjoy the spotlight while you can, Jasmine. Politics is brutal, and the same people cheering for you today will turn on you tomorrow." The words hung heavy in the air, but there was no energy behind them. It sounded less like a warning and more like a plea. Crockett smiled faintly, not mocking but steady. She leaned forward and answered with the same calm clarity that had carried her all night. "If the people turn on me tomorrow, it will be because I failed them. And if I fail them, I won't blame them for it. That's what accountability looks like. And it's what leadership demands." The crowd roared again, standing in unison. Some waved signs, others lifted their phones to capture the moment. The contrast couldn't have been sharper, Harris's bitterness against Crockett's unshakable poise. Crockett's voice carried above the cheers as she added, "You see, Madam Vice President, I don't fear the people's judgment. I welcome it. Because the only leaders worth keeping are the ones who answer to the people, not the other way around." The reaction was overwhelming. People stomped their feet, clapped, and shouted until the hall shook. Even the moderator, who had tried so hard to keep neutrality, couldn't hide the small smile tugging at his lips. Kamala Harris froze, realizing she had been completely cornered. Every attempt to rattle her opponent had backfired. The more she erupted, the stronger Jasmine Crockett appeared. And now, with the entire hall chanting her name once again, Crockett stood taller than ever, untouchable. The cameras panned across the sea of faces in the audience, people on their feet, clapping, cheering, chanting. It no longer felt like a debate stage. It felt like a turning point. Harris, clearly flustered, attempted one final retort. She gripped the microphone tightly. "This isn't leadership, Jasmine, it's performance. Anyone can stand here and play to the crowd. But when the applause fades, when the lights go off, you'll be exposed for what you really are, unprepared." A hush fell over the hall. Harris had gone all in, hoping her words would sting. But Crockett, calm as ever, tilted her head and let a small smile flicker across her lips. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, but it carried like thunder. "You keep calling this a performance. But the truth is, Madam Vice President, the people aren't applauding me. They're applauding the truth. And truth doesn't fade when the lights turn off. Truth doesn't vanish when the cameras stop rolling. Truth endures, long after eruptions and insults are forgotten." The audience erupted once more, louder than at any point that night. The sound was so deafening that Harris actually recoiled from her microphone, as if the cheers themselves were pushing her back. Crockett raised her hand for silence, and again the audience obeyed instantly. That command of the room, effortless, unforced, spoke louder than any argument. She leaned closer to the mic, and if being prepared means shouting people down, silencing voices, and ruling with fear, then no, I'm not prepared for that. Because the future doesn't belong to the loudest voice. It belongs to the strongest vision. And I stand here tonight with mine intact. The standing ovation that followed seemed endless. Even some who had arrived loyal to Harris found themselves swept into the moment, clapping against their own instincts. Harris looked down at her notes, then out at the crowd that was no longer hers. She had no words left. The cameras lingered on Harris's face, her forced smile barely hiding the weight of defeat pressing on her shoulders. The contrast was unmistakable. Crockett stood tall, calm, and collected, while Harris looked rattled and drained. The moderator finally attempted to restore balance. "Thank you, Representative Crockett. Vice President Harris, will move to the next question." But before he could finish, the crowd began chanting again. Asterisk, Crockett. 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 Asterisk. The sound shook the rafters. The moderator's words were drowned out, and the networks broadcasting the debate didn't cut away. They knew this was the moment people would remember. Crockett raised her hand once more, and just like before, the audience fell silent out of respect. That silence only deepened her authority. Looking directly into the cameras, she spoke, not to Harris, not to the moderator, but to the millions watching at home. Her tone was firm, steady, almost presidential. "You've heard shouting tonight. You've heard anger. But ask yourselves, when your families are struggling, when your bills are piling up, when you wonder if tomorrow will be better than today, do you want anger, or do you want answers? Do you want leaders who erupt, or leaders who endure?" The hall erupted in applause, but ETT didn't pause this time. Her words poured out with conviction. The people don't need a performance. They don't need another eruption. They need someone who will stand in the fire, steady, and still listen. "And if nothing else, I've shown you tonight that no storm, no insult, no eruption can shake me." The standing ovation was immediate, thunderous, and seemingly endless. Even the moderator looked stunned, realizing the debate was no longer a contest, it was a coronation. Harris shifted uncomfortably, realizing that Crockett had done more than win the night. She had defined it. The debate hall now felt electric, every eye glued to the stage, every ear waiting for Crockett's next word. The crowd's energy wasn't just support anymore, it was devotion. Cameras caught audience members nodding, some even wiping tears as they clapped. Harris, sensing the ground slipping completely from under her, made one last attempt. Her voice cracked as she forced a smile. "Well, Jasmine, it's easy to sound inspiring when you've never had the weight of the presidency on your shoulders. One day, reality will humble you." The line, intended as a strike, instead landed as desperation. The audience didn't even react. Silence spread, broken only by the faint clicking of reporters' keyboards. Crockett waited a beat before answering. She didn't rush. Her calm presence only magnified the impact of what she said next. "Reality doesn't humble me, Madam Vice President. It fuels me. I don't run from challenges. I embrace them. Because leadership isn't about carrying the weight alone, it's about lifting it together, with the people you serve." The room exploded again. Applause, cheers, chants, it was a tidal wave of energy, swallowing every corner of the hall. Harris's shoulders slumped slightly, her composure shattered. Crockett pressed on, her voice rising just enough to match the energy in the room. "Tonight, the people have seen the difference." One voice erupted. The other endured. And endurance, calm, steady, unshaken, is what will carry us forward. The ovation was deafening, and this time it didn't fade quickly. It built, wave after wave, until even the cameras seemed to shake. Harris glanced at her podium one last time, her expression tight. She had no words left. Jasmine Crockett stood still, her hands folded, her calm presence magnified by the chaos around her. She hadn't just silenced the room, she had claimed it. The ovation seemed endless, a storm of applause, cheers, and chants that shook the entire hall. The moderator no longer tried to interrupt, he knew this wasn't his moment. It belonged to Jasmine Crockett. Harris, stiff and pale under the lights, lowered her gaze. Every attempt she had made to dominate the stage had been turned back on her, leaving her looking smaller with each outburst. The cameras caught the subtle slump of her shoulders, the tight grip on her notes, the forced smile that had long since faded. Crockett, by contrast, stood tall and unshaken. When the crowd finally calmed, she leaned into the microphone one last time. Her voice, steady and unwavering, carried across the room. Leadership is not about who can shout the loudest, or who can silence their opponent. Leadership is about vision, courage, and the ability to endure without breaking. Tonight, I didn't have to scream to be heard. I didn't have to erupt to make a point. I stood here calm, steady, and the people have spoken. The audience erupted again, this time with chants that filled the air like thunder. Crockett. 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 Harris didn't respond. She simply adjusted her jacket, forced a brittle smile, and stared down at her podium as the cameras captured every second of her silence. The debate was over. But the story of the night was clear. Kamala Harris had erupted, and Jasmine Crockett's calm comeback had silenced not just the room, but the entire nation watching.